I never thought betrayal could taste so bitter. It's not like I was naive. I've been around long enough to know that life doesn't pitch underhand. But what happened last summer knocked the wind out of me in a way I never saw coming. My name's Jessica Hayes. I'm 29, a sports journalist based out of Denver. Growing up, baseball was my life. My dad played in the minors, my brother coached at the college level, and I knew how to throw a curveball by the time I was 10. My career was built on a love for the game, and that's why this whole thing still stings so damn much. The story starts with Travis Cole, a center fielder for the Denver Rockies. If you're not a baseball fan, imagine the kind of guy who could sell out a stadium even during a slump. Travis wasn't just talented, he was magnetic. Tall, sharp jawline, that cocky grin you'd want to hate but couldn't. He'd been with the Rockies for 3 years, but last season was shaping up to be his breakout year. I met Travis at a charity gala in April. He was charming in that way athletes always are, and even though I knew better than to get involved with someone I might have to cover, I let my guard down. He bought me a drink, we talked about growing up with baseball, and before I knew it, I was falling. For months, everything felt perfect. He wasn't just smooth on the field, he was thoughtful off it. He'd send me flowers to the office, sneak me into exclusive post-game events, and call me after midnight just to say he missed me. I knew the risks. Dating an athlete meant living in the shadows, dodging gossip and whispers, but I told myself it was worth it. But then things started to unravel, as they always do when something feels too good to be true. The hotel hallway. It was late June when I flew out to Chicago to surprise him. The Rockies were playing a 3-game series against the Cubs, and I had some vacation time saved up. I didn't tell Travis I was coming. I wanted to see his face light up when I showed up at the hotel lobby. That night, I was standing near the glass elevator, watching the team filter in after the game. And that's when I saw them. Travis walked in with a woman by his side. She wasn't just tall and blonde, she was stunning, like she'd walked off a magazine cover. She was laughing at something he said, her hand brushing his arm. He leaned in closer to her, and they disappeared down the hall together. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The world around me faded into static, the muffled sounds of players laughing and hotel staff calling out greetings. My heartbeat drowned everything else out. I thought about calling out to him, about storming after them and demanding answers. But instead, I stayed frozen, my nails digging into the strap of my bag as I watched them vanish into the elevator. The shadowy alley. The next day, I followed my instincts as a journalist, even though my heart begged me not to. After the game, I went to one of the popular post-game haunts near Wrigley Field, a place I knew the players liked to hang out. I told myself I wasn't stalking him, I was gathering clarity. It was there, outside a dimly lit bar in a narrow alley, that I found him again. I stayed back, hidden in the shadow of a dumpster, my breath catching in my throat as I saw the two of them together. They were standing close, their voices too low for me to hear. But then she reached out, her hand resting on his chest. He didn't move away. I clenched my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. Part of me wanted to run up to him, to shout, to scream, but instead, I just watched as she leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't a soft, hesitant kiss. It was confident, familiar, like this wasn't their first. When they pulled apart, he smiled at her, his hand sliding to her waist as they walked into the bar together. I staggered back, the world spinning around me. I don't remember how I got back to my hotel that night. I just know that when I closed my door, I slid to the floor and cried until I couldn't see straight. The confrontation. The night I confronted Travis was something out of a movie. I waited for him at my apartment, pacing the living room while the clock ticked past midnight. When he walked through the door, he looked surprised to see me. "Jess? What's going on?" I didn't waste any time. "Who is she, Travis?" He froze, his face a mixture of confusion and guilt. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone, showing him the photos I'd saved, the ones from Chicago, the ones from Instagram, and a particularly damning shot of the two of them at dinner in LA. His face drained of color. "Jess, it's not what it looks like. Don't." My voice cracked as I shouted. "Don't insult me with that cliché. Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I wouldn't find out?" For a moment, he just stood there, his hands clenched at his sides. And then he said the words that broke me. "It just got complicated. Complicated." Like cheating was some unsolvable puzzle, like the pain I was feeling was just collateral damage in his chaotic, glamorous life. I threw his things at him, one by one, his spare sweatshirt, his toothbrush, the cap he left on my dresser. "Get out," I said, my voice low and shaking. "And don't come back." He tried to say something else, but I slammed the door in his face. The diamond reveal. The final gut punch came in October. The Rockies had missed the playoffs, and Travis had been traded to the Yankees. I'd done my best to avoid him, throwing myself into work, but I couldn't escape the headlines. One night, as I scrolled mindlessly through my phone, I saw her face again. The blonde. She was smiling in a black and white photo, her hand resting on Travis's chest. On her finger was a diamond so big it seemed to mock me. The caption read, "Said yes to my MVP. Can't wait to be Mrs. Cole." I dropped my phone, my chest heaving with sobs. The grand slam that never came. It's been 6 months since then. I'm still writing, still covering the Rockies, but I've learned to keep my distance. Sometimes, I catch myself thinking about Travis, the way he smiled, the way he made me feel like I was the only one in the room. But then I remember the hotel, the alley, the diamond. Life, like baseball, throws curveballs you can't always hit. But I'm learning to stand in the batter's box, ready for whatever comes next. And maybe one day, I'll find someone who doesn't need to play games to win my heart. The off-season gave me space to heal, or at least pretend I was healing. On the surface, I looked fine. I was nailing assignments, traveling to cover winter training camps, and even snagged a spot on a national panel about women in sports journalism. But every time I saw a headline about Travis or scrolled past his new fiancée's curated Instagram life, it was like ripping off the scab all over again. I buried myself in work, hoping the grind would keep the memories at bay. Baseball, though, has a cruel way of mirroring life. The game is slow, strategic, moments of action broken up by long stretches of nothing but waiting. And in those quiet stretches, your thoughts catch up to you. The confrontation I didn't expect. Spring training came faster than I wanted, and with it, a new season of Rockies games to cover. I convinced myself I'd moved on, that I could walk into Coors Field without feeling his shadow lurking behind me. For the first few weeks, it worked. Until one night in May. It was a post-game charity event, one of those polished affairs where athletes schmooze with sponsors and local bigwigs. I was there to write a piece about the team's community outreach, not to reminisce about the past. But as I worked the room, sipping on a glass of white wine, I spotted him. Travis. He looked different in Yankees pinstripes, a little sharper, a little colder. His fiancée wasn't with him, but the way the crowd gravitated toward him told me everything I needed to know. He was still him, still the star, still magnetic. Our eyes met across the room, and for a second, I froze. My instinct was to turn and run, but instead, I stayed rooted in place, staring him down. He walked over, his usual swagger muted by something softer. Regret, maybe. "Jess," he said, his voice low. "Can we talk?" I laughed, a bitter sound that barely masked the lump in my throat. "What could you possibly have to say to me, Travis?" "I owe you an apology," he said, shoving his hands in his pockets like a kid caught stealing. "I messed up. Big time. And I hate that I hurt you." I stared at him, waiting for the anger to come. But instead, all I felt was tired. "You didn't just hurt me," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. You shattered the way I see people. The way I trust. That's not something you can fix with an apology. He nodded, his jaw tightening. I know. I needed you to know I'm sorry. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him that sorry wasn't good enough, that he didn't deserve my forgiveness. But instead, I said, I hope she's worth it, and walked away. The grand slam. The rest of the night was a blur. I left the event early, my heart pounding like I'd just run a marathon. As I walked through the quiet streets of downtown Denver, I realized something that stopped me in my tracks. For months, I'd let Travis's betrayal define me. Every headline, every photo of him and his fiancée, every memory of the good times we'd shared, I'd let it weigh me down like an anchor. But seeing him again, hearing his apology, reminded me of something important. His choices weren't a reflection of my worth. I stood there under the glow of a street lamp, the cool night air brushing against my skin, and made a promise to myself. I was done letting him live rent-free in my head. I was done being angry, done feeling broken. The final play. That summer, I started writing a column called The Human Side of the Game. It was a series of stories about the people behind the sport, the rookies struggling to make it, the veterans chasing one last win, the fans whose lives revolved around their teams. The column took off in ways I hadn't expected. It got picked up by a national outlet, and before long, I was traveling across the country, interviewing players and fans alike. The work reminded me why I fell in love with baseball in the first place. By the time the Rockies faced the Yankees in September, I felt like a new person. Travis played well that night, he always did, but for the first time, watching him didn't sting. When he came up to bat in the ninth inning, the bases loaded and the game on the line, I didn't feel anger or longing. I just felt nothing. He struck out swinging, and the crowd erupted in cheers as the Rockies claimed the win. As I packed up my gear, I glanced toward the field one last time. Travis was walking back to the dugout, his head held high despite the loss. And just like that, the chapter closed. The next season. It's been a year since that game, and I'm happier than I've ever been. My career is thriving, I've built a life that feels full and rich, and I've even started dating again. Sometimes, I think about Travis. Not often, and not with the same pain I used to feel. He's just a memory now, a lesson in resilience and self-worth. Life, like baseball, doesn't always go the way you plan. But every so often, it surprises you with a home run when you least expect it. And this time, I'm swinging for the fences. The story ended quietly, almost without drama, just the way I wanted it. I wasn't looking for a grand resolution or an apology to fix the past. Life, like baseball, is about learning how to keep playing, even when it feels like the game is lost. A year after I last saw Travis, I found myself in a different chapter of my life. My career was thriving, my column had taken off, and I'd just accepted an offer to work with a major national sports network. But more importantly, I'd found peace. Travis no longer occupied any space in my head. Sure, his name still popped up in sports headlines, and I'd occasionally see his face on TV, but it didn't sting anymore. He was just another player in a game I once thought we were playing together. One evening, while walking home from covering a game, I passed a little league field near my neighborhood. The kids were playing with a passion and joy that I hadn't seen in a long time, not even among the pros. I stopped to watch, sitting on the edge of the wooden bleachers as the sun dipped low in the sky. Their love for the game was so pure, untainted by fame or ego, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled. That night, I realized baseball, like life, still held meaning for me. When I got home, I opened my laptop and started writing, not a column, not a story for work, but something just for me. I wrote about the heartbreak, the lessons, and how I'd learned to pick myself up. I wrote about the way baseball teaches you to be patient, to endure the waiting, and to take your swings even when the odds are stacked against you. Travis had been a chapter in my life, but he wasn't the whole story. The rest of the story was mine to write. And now, I was ready to take my next swing.